Welcome to the Darkstream, Vox Day, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. Looks like we've got a lively evening on Unauthorized going. I saw that Big Bear and Stefan are already streaming. That's cool. And as you can see, if you've been on the site, you can see we're making those last little tweaks and changes that are necessary. So hopefully we'll be able to have some news for you here early next week, but we shall see. Been a very busy week. We're going to be making some changes to the Castalia library relatively soon, upgrading our leathers for history. We're going to do a test. I got off the phone with BindTech today, had a good meeting with them, and they're open to letting us try this new sheepskin that we've been experimenting with. And in fact, the top book behind me, those are all different test meditations, and the top one is actually made out of this sheepskin that we are thinking about using. Rainline says the random video feature on the mobile splash page brings up some weird stuff from the past. Well, there's plenty of weird stuff in the present too. So the nice thing is that we can control that now. Right now, it's I think it's set to be fairly random, but that can be adjusted, and we can I believe we can lock things out or not. Yep, going with my my new old man style. Hey, it's summertime. You know, I adopted it in Barcelona, and I decided, you know what, I think this works for me. So, anyhow, thanks to the 3 or 4 people that have been instrumental in getting me access to the 1966 Wistar Symposium in Philadelphia. It's been really interesting to read. It's been really interesting to see how some things haven't changed in the slightest. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But I also can see how and why the correct mathematical challenges that were posed to the neo-Darwinian faithful did not pass muster, the reason that they couldn't convince them with it. And it's for the same reason that the various arguments by David Berlinski and other mainstream would-be leading Darwinian skeptics, neo-Darwinian skeptics, are similarly ineffective. And I'll explain that after I read you a summary of the conference. But here first, let's read the introduction from the Peter Medahar, who is a immunologist who is hosting the conference. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to make a few introductory remarks. I think it is the distinguishing mark of all true biologists, as opposed to mere sectarian specialists, that they are deeply interested in the mechanism of evolution." Can't be a true biologist without being interested in evolution, huh? As Dr. Kaplan has explained, the immediate cause of this conference is a pretty widespread sense of dissatisfaction about what has come to be thought of as the accepted evolutionary theory in the English-speaking world, the so-called neo-Darwinian theory. This dissatisfaction has been expressed from 3 quarters and is not only scientific. First of all, religious. Where once the complaint was that evolution happened at all, now the complaint generally is that it happens without divine motivation. Many of you will have read with incredulous horror the kind of pious bunk written by Teilhard de Chardin on this subject. if Professor Schulzenberger will excuse my putting it that way. So we've got some real open minds here. Then there are philosophical or methodological objections to evolutionary theory. They have been very well voiced by Professor Karl Popper that the current neo-Darwinian theory has the methodological defect of explaining too much. It is too difficult to imagine or envisage an evolutionary episode which could not be explained by the formula of neo-Darwinism. And of course, that's a philosophical point. And Popper's correct. Evolutionary theory is both useless and irrelevant. If you can say that the same thing explains up, down, black, white, and it can't predict anything at all, it's not only is it not science, it's not even a functional philosophical model. It's useless, totally useless. Nobody uses neo-Darwinism or neo-Darwinism for anything. Finally, and these are really, I think, the only objections that should concern us, there are objections made by fellow scientists who feel that, in the current theory, something is missing, and we look forward to hearing their formulation of what precisely is missing. But what's missing is the numbers don't add up. But anyhow, these objections to current neo-Darwinian theory are very widely held among biologists generally, and we must on no account, I think, make light of them. The very fact that we are having this conference is evidence that we are not making light of them. Well, that was true back in 1966. Of course, within 10 years, when I was taking biology class in 5th grade, they were already had already moved to the position of if you are intelligent and you are educated, then you will believe that evolution explains everything about life, the universe, and everything. And I can remember how confused my teacher was, Hal Shaber at Valentine Hills Elementary School. I raised my hand and I said, I don't understand how this could explain what you're talking about. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, here we are studying this stuff about, asteroids and planets, and then you're bringing evolution into it. I said, but doesn't that presuppose the existence of life? He looked a little panicked and said, well, evolution doesn't actually explain that. That's outside the boundaries of evolutionary theory. But it was clear that they were presenting it as if it was a unified whole with the Big Bang Theory, with microspores, the magic, the lightning striking the puddle. It was all presented as one scientifically proven, completed whole. And yet it didn't make sense even at that very childish level. And the funny thing is, as you get older, you keep assuming that, well, okay, it's got to get better than that. I mean, they must just be simplifying it for the basis of, in order to make it more comprehensible to the masses, et cetera, et cetera. It's not. I can tell you flat out, it's not. All of that posturing by biologists is literally a bluff. And here's the thing. Most modern biologists may not realize it, but these biologists did. And I'll explain why. This is a summary written by someone after the conference, just to summarize what had happened at it. The probability of Darwinist evolution depends upon the quantity of favorable micromutations required to create complex organs and organisms, the frequency with which such favorable micromutations occur, just where and when they are needed, the efficacy of natural selection in preserving the slight improvements with sufficient consistency to permit the benefits to accumulate, and the time allotted by the fossil record for all of this to have happened. Now, keep in mind, this is before genetic science had advanced to the point where we actually had a genetic record. So what they were identifying back in 1966 was exactly the problem that I've pointed out. They knew on the basis of the probabilities concerned that the numbers weren't going to add up. But here's the problem. They didn't have the actual numbers. They were correct, don't get me wrong. The skeptics were absolutely correct. But the skeptics couldn't prove their case. It would be as if they had made some astronomical observations, and on the basis of those observations calculated that an asteroid was going to strike the moon. But let's say that they're trying to prove this to some other scientists who don't have access to a telescope. Even if they're correct, they can't prove it. So that's fundamentally been the problem for most of the last, whatever it's been, 60 years. Unless we can make calculations taking all of these factors into account, we have no way of knowing whether evolution by micromutation is more or less improbable than evolution by macromutation. So they couldn't know that. They admitted they couldn't know that. They couldn't do the calculations. But now we can. Now we can. And here's the thing. The biologists, the Darwinian faithful, already didn't want to address that problem then. Imagine how they're going to run from this one. Some mathematicians did try to make the calculations, and the result was a rather acrimonious confrontation between themselves and some of the leading Darwinists at the Wistar Institute in Philadelphia in 1967. It's actually 1966, but that's okay. The report of the exchange is fascinating, not just because of the substance of the mathematical challenge, but even more because of the logic of the Darwinist response. For example, the mathematician D.S. Ulam argued that it was highly improbable that the eye could have evolved by the accumulation of small mutations, because the number of mutations would have to be so large and the time available was not nearly long enough for them to appear, which, by the way, is correct. Sir Peter Medawar and C.H. Waddington responded that Ulam was doing his science backwards. The fact was that the eye had evolved, and therefore the mathematical difficulties must only be apparent. Okay, so what they were doing was demonstrating that they were philosophically incompetent. That's not science. You're not doing science by taking a observation, declaring that you can imagine an explanation, and therefore because you can imagine the explanation for the existing fact, therefore your imagined theory is true. I mean, that's just insane. That's so philosophically and logically inept that it had to be dishonest. They had to know that they were just engaging in nothing but pure rhetoric. Ernst Mayr observed that Ulam's calculations were based on assumptions that might be unfounded, and concluded that somehow or other, by adjusting these figures, we will come out all right. We are comforted by the fact that evolution has occurred. So it's amusing that they're claiming that their assumptions must be correct because somebody else made some different assumptions, despite the fact that those different assumptions were actually more based in mathematical probability than their own. And again, this is the problem that they had, the problem that the skeptics had, because when you're presenting a probability-based argument, you cannot, by definition, offer a proof. No matter how strong the probability, no matter how absolutely confident you are, no matter how you're correct to place your bets on that high probability, it's not a proof. It's not conclusive. And if you have people like these Darwinian true faithful, if you have people whose livelihoods literally depend upon continuing to believe what they say they believe, there's absolutely no way that they're going to wave the white flag in response to a probability-based argument, no matter how strong the probability is. We've already seen that in physics. The probability of all the various constants required for life to be possible on this planet are very, very low. There's so many things that have to go right. It's called the anthropic principle. And so what did they do? They just invented multiverse theory. Well, yeah, the odds are 1 in 10 billion, but if there's 10 billion universes, then of course it happened. Which, again, totally inept philosophically, totally retarded logic, and yet adults actually pretend to accept those arguments. It's absolutely ludicrous. It is so much more likely that aliens or gods or ancient human races from other galaxies created life on this planet in some way that, it's not even funny. And yet people will tell people who believe in aliens that they're crazy. They'll tell people who believe in gods that they're crazy. And yet they will treat people who talk about the multiverse as if they're, intelligent and shouldn't even be questioned. Ironic Keyword is correct. The multiverse would be retarded philosophy for a bunch of stoned teenagers. The thing that I find hilarious about the whole multiverse escape is that multiverse theory points toward there being a God. Again, I'm looking at this with my game designer's hat on. But if you think about it, the game designer perspective of our fallen world actually tends to point to there being other games. The universe as a game strongly indicates, or the universe as certainly a universe as a simulation, absolutely points to there being a simulation maker, a game maker. The more they try to avoid the concept of a creator God by expanding the slate, the more it points to the very thing they're trying to avoid. But of course, they're not philosophically competent. They're not mathematically competent. And they're wildly illogical. So you can't really expect much more. The Rogue Roman said, aliens created us is the next thing, though. Yes, and it's closer to the truth. It might even be the truth, in a manner of speaking. I'm not going to, yeah, it didn't just explode out of nothing. Exploded out of nothing a lot. Just, just so retarded. Um, Anyhow, to go on, the Darwinists were trying to be reasonable, but it was as if Ulam had presented equations proving that gravity is too weak a force to prevent us all from floating off into space. Darwinism was to them not a theory open to refutation, but a fact to be accounted for, at least until the mathematicians could produce an acceptable alternative. The discussion became particularly heated after a French mathematician named Schutzenberger concluded that there is a considerable gap in the neo-Darwinian theory of evolution, and we believe this gap to be of such a nature that it cannot be bridged within the current conception of biology. C.H. Waddington thought he saw where this reasoning was headed and retorted that your argument is simply that life must have come about by special creation. Schutzenberger and anonymous voices from the audience shouted no, but in fact, the mathematicians did not present an alternative. So what? It is easier to disprove something. It is easier to show that something is false than it is to prove something is true and correct, especially if you're trying to prove it in a conclusive manner. So all of this, well, what's your alternative, is just, again, philosophical incompetence. You know, think about, it's kind of funny because scientists like to complain that science is not respected by the courts. But you know why science is not respected by the courts? Because it's so weak. Because it's so often wrong. And also, as we've seen, scientists are totally inept when it comes to philosophy. Think about what the equivalent of the evolutionary argument would be in a courtroom. You've just proven that the accused was not physically in the same state as the murder victim at the time of the murder. There was no way that he was there. And the prosecutor says, well, if my client didn't do it, who did? And the defense attorney says, I don't know. I'm not the detective. I'm not the police. It's not my job to solve the case. I'm just telling you, he didn't do it. And if the judge was a scientist, the judge would say, bam, guilty. Unless and until you can produce an alternative explanation, what the prosecutor says is true. I mean, think about how that would not only be considered a miscarriage of justice, that would be considered retardary and incompetence of a level to remove the judge from the bench. You know, I very much doubt you will find much case law where a judge actually accepts the argument because you don't have an alternative culprit. I'm going to rule that the accused who has been proven to not be guilty of it to be guilty. This is how bad the very best arguments that the neo-Darwinians can provide are. They're that incompetent. And so that's one of the reasons why they're so desperate to avoid and discredit and poo-poo my mathematical disproof, based on the impossibility of the rate of mutational fixation to account for the observed genetic differences. We got hard limits now. We're not talking about probability. We're not saying, Well, it's unlikely. We're saying it is flat out impossible. If you were walking, it is not possible for you to walk from Boston to New York City in 20 minutes. There's no way to claim, well, you're making some assumptions. You're making some unfounded assumptions that humans can't walk more than more than 6 miles an hour. What if a human could walk 700 miles an hour? Then he could walk to Boston, and that's the level now that and again, I'm not claiming that my perspective is new. All I'm doing is finishing the arguments that the evolutionary skeptics of 1966 were pointing to. They didn't have the data that we did. It's very similar to what's going on in economics right now. We now have a lot more data about globalization. A lot of the theories that held up rather nicely when there was no information to apply to it, a lot of those theories don't hold up now that we have actual numbers. So what the skeptics were doing in 1966 was absolutely correct. They were absolutely correct. They simply didn't have the numbers to provide the conclusive disproof. We have the numbers. Darwin is dead. Darwinian theory is dead. All of it is absolute toast, because and you can tell this to absolutely everybody that tries to argue with you. You can tell them. They're going to dance around this, and they're going to come up with all kinds of, well, punctuated equilibrium and this. I have given every single possible advantage, every single possible interpretation to the benefit of the Neo-Darwinian theory. Number of generations, distance in time, speed of bacterial mutations and fixations, simultaneous fixations, every single excuse that they have managed to come up with, and one or two that I don't think they've even come up with yet, because they don't understand the gravity of their problem yet. But even when you give every single possible advantage, it's orders of magnitude short. It's not even remotely close. And this is without even getting into the fact that the quote-unquote junk DNA actually turns out to matter. And so what you should do anytime somebody expresses his doubt is you tell them, do the math. They will do everything, and they will come up with every excuse to avoid doing the math, because they know, just like the participants in the Worcester Symposium knew, they know that they're wrong. They just don't want to accept it yet. They just don't want to admit it yet. And the funny thing is, it is so obvious that you don't need to be a mathematician. You don't need to be a philosopher. You don't need to be a scientist. You don't even need to be particularly good at math. It's pretty basic arithmetic. And and that's why it's so powerful, because there's no escaping it. they're in the position of saying that it is absolute certainty that I'm going to work out, I'm going to compare the numbers at some point to make a precise analogy, but it's basically akin to saying that they know for scientific certainty that a 12-year-old girl walked from New York City to Los Angeles in 20 minutes. That's roughly the nonsensical position that they are defending. And that's why it's so easy to destroy. So that's all I've got to say about that. Speaking of intelligence and artificial intelligence, if you don't mind indulging me, I was messing around a bit again with the AI systems. So I'm going to play you 2 new AI songs just for kicks, if that's of interest to you. And then also I should mention before we do that, we are still waiting to find out whether the new printing style is worked for Ghost of the Badlands. Razorfist is supposed to be able to get them tonight, or they're supposed to be delivered tonight. Whether he's actually able to check them out and let us know, I don't know, but hopefully we'll get some good news on that front and be able to get them out. What we've done, what we realized we had to do, the Castalia Library Substack has been so popular and worked so well in keeping people informed that we have set one up for Archaven as well. And so if you have any interest in ArcTunes, or if you ever buy books from the Archaven store, other than the Castalia Library related ones, I strongly recommend that you subscribe to this Substack. I'm typing in the link. There it is. I highly recommend that you subscribe to archaven.substack.com. It doesn't cost anything. It's free. You'll get a daily email just basically saying, hey, here's what's new on ArcTunes today. More importantly, whenever we've got important news like we did today, we're able to put it up there, get it out to everybody. Everybody knows about it. Problems, if not necessarily solved, at least you're informed. So anyhow, without further ado, these were produced with Suno. I think I'm getting a little bit better at it, but I think it's going to need at least 2 more versions before you can actually do a full song that doesn't go insane after the 3rd section. Because the thing is, it's supposed to be extendable, but the thing is that even though you can do it multiple times, the longer the thing goes on, the more it departs from where it was. So there's obviously something in the system that needs to be improved a bit, but it's still fun to play with. So here's one called "Wake Me When I'm Dead."
to steam. Let me out of here. Release me to the dream. Light me up, fire me up, blow me up and send me to the sky. Light me up, fire me up, so I will never die. So I will never die. So I will never die. I'm going to live forever. Wake me when I'm dead. Eternally then never, never. Wake me when I'm dead. Going to live forever. Wake me when I'm dead. Eternally then never, never. Wake me when I'm dead. I'm never gonna die. I'm never gonna
Anyhow, you can see how it spirals. You can't really build yet because it doesn't really go properly into the next section. It tries to sometimes, and that's why, for example, there's a repeated lyrics, because you can't. Sometimes you just can't get the thing to repeat in the same style, or even, which is crazy, the same voice. So, anyhow, I'll fire this one up too. This one is called "All the Evil in the World." I think this one's a little bit more coherent than the other one. I just like what I liked about the last one was that big chorus. That really worked. I mean, I was talking about it with Paul of Psychosonic, and he's like, geez, these things, they come up with these hooks. He's like, the song structure can be crazy, but the hooks can be great. I actually use two platforms. I use both Suno and Udion. Udion, it's in beta. It's not even the initial release, so you can't be too harsh on them. But Udion's nowhere near as good as Suno yet. It's got some structure built in that could be better, or that it should work better. Can you start the song with a softer style and extend with a harder style? To a certain extent, but the AI just doesn't listen very much. I mean, you can literally say instrumental, flute solo, and it'll just ignore it completely. So they really need to work on getting the tags to function more efficiently. But what it does do is, if you tell it you want a big chorus, it'll give you a big chorus. What it might not do is have the bridge build into it properly. And the two things that are most maddening are, number one, that you can't really do any editing. Like, for example, you might not like the way it pronounces a word. Well, you can't fix it. You're just that. There you are. That's why I say that for right now, as a tool, it's primarily useful for bands and songwriters, because it allows you to hear the ideas much more quickly. I can write a lyric. These are all what might interest you to know. Most of these were written a while ago. It was just stuff I wrote for Psychosonic in case we ever got back together and did something. And so I had a bunch of stuff that I could just put in and see how it worked. And it was really interesting to see the reaction from, like Rachel and Paul, because instead of me sending them, some words, and the thing is, words are not just words. If you're a decent lyricist, there's an intrinsic pattern to them. There's an intrinsic flow to them. So it's not quite nothing. but it's pretty close to nothing because there's no melody. But now you not only get the melody, but you can kind of get the syncopation. That, you know, it gives you a starting point, and that's what's so useful. I mean, John is here. He can. I would welcome his thoughts on it. I mean, I personally think it should help us, you know, make that leap from doing covers to originals. I could be wrong. You know, we did try working on an original once, and you know, we were missing that point. We didn't have the melody and the hook. You know. But now you have the ability to say, instead of only people who can hear things in their head, this gives people who need to hear it in their ears a way to start working on things. So here's the other one I was going to play. It's called All the Evil in the World, and we'll see what you think.
Falling from heaven isn't hard. It only takes a bit of pride. Rage like lightning fills the sky with nowhere left to hide. Broken and shattered by the fall, malignant, full of hate. You haven't learned at all as you degenerate. You haven't learned. You haven't learned. You haven't learned at all. All the evil in the world is right behind your eyes. All the evil in the world is the thing that you despise. Now you seek to break me too, to force me to submit. Now you turn me into you, a hateful counterfeit. All the evil in the world is right behind your eyes. All the evil in the world is the thing that you despise. All the evil in the world is right behind your eyes. All the evil in the world is the thing that All the evil in the world is right behind your eyes. All the evil in the world is the thing that you despise. All the evil in the world is right behind your eyes. All the evil in the world make you
Yeah, I haven't bothered to put an outro on that one yet. So, anyhow, it's really fun, and it like I said, it gives you a starting point. It gives you a place to maybe turn it into a proper full professional song. So we'll see. But you know, can you give it artists as influence? Not directly, no. You can. It's not like the visual AIs where you can say in the style of Rowena. Like for example, I did this one today for to just to throw some visuals into the Battlesuit Bastards, and this was the reason I thought this was so interesting was because I said I wanted a woman with a brunette, red dress, white scarf, painting in the style of Rowena Morrill. And obviously, the woman is sort of the standard pretty AI woman, right? But what I thought was interesting was that they actually did get the sort of painted feel. I mean, it actually does look a bit like a Rowena background. Um, Here's another one from the same, how they kick out a couple different responses to the prompt. Here's another one. This one I think I didn't use it because I didn't like it as the street image as much. But see, this one doesn't have the same. This looks a bit more like a photograph. They didn't really nail the painted background as much. But you can't really do that. You definitely can't do it on Udion. On Suno, you have to kind of describe the voice. So like I usually will tell it to use like an ethereal female voice or some other adjective in that. If you want something that's like a bit more grinding and gritty, you have to just use that those adjectives to get what you want more or less. Udion has much better voices, like in terms of the quality of the voice, but it doesn't do the melodies as well, and it certainly doesn't give you the sort of vocal hooks that Suno does. I use Bing right now, but what I'm looking to figure out is some people have had some success in doing persistent characters. That's kind of the gold standard that we're looking for the illustrated episodes for ArcTunes. And so, once you can teach it, basically have it make a character and then say, use that, like that is character A. I want character A doing this. Of course, the only people who can get that sort of thing to work right now are the guys doing porn deep fakes. And the amount of time and effort and 3D modeling and all that stuff they put into it. I mean, they're just on they're on a totally different level. It's just a pity that their efforts are so wasted. Ironic Keyboard said Midjourney is good with that. It may be. I use Midjourney a little bit at first. I mean, anything that makes me screw around with Discord, I'm really not that interested in. Um, you need something that's a reasonable interface. Kriya responds, but how does Kriya do with regards to a persistent character? I mean, it's fine that it can do easy and automatic 111, create a textual inversion for a consistent character. I don't know what create a textual inversion for a consistent character means, Nipmeister. But anyhow, I mean, we're getting close. We're getting close. But, and of course you've always got the problem that the best feature programmers, the ones who come up with the best core stuff, tend to be autistic, if not retarded, when it comes to user interface stuff. Well, I mean, user interface, I mean, it's always all you have to do, you know, whenever I hear it, all you have to do, I'm just like, I just stop listening. Because the first thing they'll immediately say is, all you have to do is install this thing that's not going to work on your system. Like, no. If it's not at that point yet, you know, the reason that I use Bing, despite its shortcomings and its severely crippled nature, is because, as you can see, I get good results out of it pretty much every single time. I very seldom, if I want something, I very seldom need to, try it more than once. Usually, if it'll kick out, sometimes when there's only two, I don't get the right one. But if it does at least three, usually one of them is good enough to use. Because let's face it, I'm just throwing in a little bit of additional video or visual content to make it more pleasant to read Sigma Game, etc., etc. I would really love to be able to do a proper illustrated text episode and really do illustrated, John C. Wright and my own stuff and Chuck Dixon and all that. Be fantastic, but we're just not at that point yet. We will be, but we're not there yet. Anyhow, well, that's all I've got for tonight. So again, if anyone brings up Darwin or evolution, just laugh and tell them absolutely not. It has been mathematically disproven, and before you try to argue with it, do the freaking math. I'm Vox Day. This is the Darkstream.